Buenos días a todos. Damos la cordial bienvenida al evento Seminario Virtual Pasa la Voz, Retos y Aprendizajes en la Enseñanza de Lenguas y cuarto encuentro de egresados de Lenguas Modernas de la Universidad del Cauca. Damos la bienvenida a todos aquellos que se han conectado por las redes, YouTube y Facebook a este evento tan importante para la Universidad del Cauca, para el programa de lenguas y para todo el grupo de profesores, docentes, estudiantes y administrativos también que se desempeñan pues en el área de la enseñanza de las lenguas. Quisiéramos agradecer la participación de todos ustedes. Gracias por haber respondido a la convocatoria que lanzamos hace unos días. Gracias por esa respuesta. Y yo sé que va a contribuir muchísimo a la experiencia y al crecimiento, digamos, profesional y personal también, ¿por qué no decirlo? Con miras a mejorar la labor educativa en el área de lenguas extranjeras, inglés y francés. Recuerden que la transmisión entonces va hasta las 9:30 de la mañana. Esperamos pues que sea de mucho enriquecimiento, que contribuya muchísimo a la labor que cada uno de nosotros desempeñamos. Yo quisiera darle en este momento la palabra a nuestro decano, el doctor Tulio Rojas Curie, decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales de la Universidad del Cauca, quien quiere también expresar algunas palabras para nuestra maravillosa audiencia. Señor decano.
Profesora Carmelina, muchas gracias. Muy buenos días para todos ustedes que nos están escuchando en este instante. Queremos darles una cordial bienvenida al seminario Pasa la Voz, Retos y Aprendizajes en la Enseñanza del Inglés y Francés, y al mismo tiempo al cuarto encuentro de egresados del programa de Lenguas Modernas de la Facultad de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales de la Universidad del Cauca. A nombre del equipo de dirección, el señor rector, doctor José Luis Diago Franco, del vicerrector académico, doctor Luis Guillermo Jaramillo, del vicerrector de Cultura, doctor René de Ibar Hurtado, del vicerrector de Investigaciones, doctor Héctor Samuel Villada, de la vicerrectora administrativa, doctora Cielo Pérez, de todo el consejo académico, del consejo de facultad y del mío propio, en mi calidad de decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales, queremos darles una cordial, sincera y respetuosa acogida. En este momento, mediante estas vías desde casa. Ojalá en otra oportunidad, como lo hemos hecho en los encuentros anteriores, lo podamos hacer en nuestras instalaciones. Quiero agradecer a la jefe del Departamento de Lenguas, profesora María Cristina Garrido, y a la profesora Carmelina Encarnación Mosquera, todo el esfuerzo que han invertido para este seminario y para el encuentro de egresados. Agradecer al profesor Cristian Hernán, que va a colaborar, pero muy especialmente darle un caluroso saludo y una cordial bienvenida y un gran agradecimiento al profesor Diego Fernando Macías, quien nos va a ilustrar con sus conocimientos, de los cuales trataremos de aprovechar al máximo para mejorar nuestros procesos de enseñanza-aprendizaje. Estamos seguros que con la experiencia del profesor Diego Fernando Macías, con los conocimientos que él nos va a dar y con la experiencia del profesor Cristian Hernán y con sus conocimientos, aprenderemos mucho en este seminario. A ustedes, muchas gracias por participar. Las lenguas son y seguirán siendo supremamente importantes, no solamente en la organización del pensamiento, sino también en la transmisión de los conocimientos. No podremos hacer transmisión de conocimiento sin las lenguas cualquiera que utilicemos de las tantas existentes en el mundo. Yo no quiero extenderme demasiado para darles todo el espacio a nuestros conferencistas y para que los participantes en el seminario y en el encuentro puedan aprovechar todas las enseñanzas. Y sepan ustedes que esta Casa de Estudios, Universidad del Cauca y la Facultad de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales siempre tendrá las puertas abiertas para acogerlos en todos los momentos. Muchas gracias.
Yo de igual manera doy la bienvenida cordial al profesor Diego Fernando Macías. Gracias por acompañarnos, gracias por haber tenido este gesto tan bueno, tan agradable de acompañarnos en esta actividad, en este evento tan importante para nosotros. Yo voy a permitirme leer su biodata, ¿ok? Y damos entonces inicio a la ponencia principal del evento. Okay. Diego Fernando Macías is an associate professor in the College of Education at Universidad Surcolombiana in Neiva, Colombia. He holds a PhD in second language acquisition and teaching from the University of Arizona. His research and professional interests span the areas of teacher education and professional development, classroom management, and English as an international language. Professor Macías is going to refer to the following topic: approaching the teaching of English as an international lingua franca, awareness raising as a starting point. Professor Macías, welcome. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Carmelina. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, perfect. Great, thank you. So I want to start by telling you how grateful I am for your and how privileged and honored I feel for your invitation. That was very kind of you to think of me to present or to share with you some of my insights and ideas derived from the literature, obviously, in connection to the topic of English as an international lingua franca. So I want to again say thank you to the Dean who's here with us today, to the Universidad del Cauca, to Professors Carmelina Encarnacion, and to Professor Maria Cristina Garrido. So thank you for your support and for your invitation. It is certainly a privilege for me to be here with you today. And obviously, I want to say hi and to welcome all the alumni, so the former students of the Programa de Licenciatura en Inglés y Francés. And I hope that there is something you can take away from my talk, from my ideas, and something you can bring to your own pedagogical practice, and maybe to your classroom, and maybe to the working knowledge you have of the processes, obviously, of language learning and teaching, and of the many implications that we can bring, obviously, to our classroom in connection to this topic that I am going to share with you. So I'll be happy to take comments or questions from you at the end. And I understand that someone will be helping me along the way with that. We have about an hour, or I have about an hour to share with you those ideas that I have put together in a few slides and that I will refer to in just a couple of minutes. Okay, let me just share my screen, and please let me know if you're looking at my presentation. Or can anyone let me know if you're actually looking at my presentation? The presentation, okay. All right, so I'm approaching the teaching of English as an international lingua franca, awareness raising as a starting point. This is certainly one of my interests. I have been, let's say that I come to this topic as a result of developing a special interest in the area of, in two large areas. In the area of language teacher education, and that involves the preparation, training, and development of language teachers, and obviously, and that includes pre-service and in-service teachers. I have been working primarily with pre-service teachers, novice teachers, or beginning teachers. That is, those are again the individuals that I often work with, or that I often do research with here at the Universidad Surcolombiana, and as part of my work. And so that is one area. And then the other area is the teaching of English as an international language, or English as a lingua franca. And some of you may have already heard different acronyms that in a way illustrate this trend to this idea. So those acronyms may include English as a global language, or World Englishes, or English as a lingua franca, or English as an international language. And there may be many other acronyms. And despite the subtle differences across these acronyms, they seem to be going in a similar direction. And I will refer to those in more detail as we move through the presentation. So I was telling you these two, I want to look at the intersections of these two areas. So language teacher education on the one hand, and then English as an international lingua franca on the other hand. So how these two elements intersect, and what we can get from this for our own professional development. Okay. This another topic that is, or another large area that is often connected to English as an international language, is the area or the phenomenon of globalization. And you are all probably aware of the fact that we live in a globalized world, and that obviously that has an impact on many areas of our lives. So technology has been playing a significant role in the development of English. Colonialism, so the initial colonialism, now we have a different kind of colonialism, and I will again offer some insights in that regard later on. International mobility, the fact that obviously it's easier to travel, and you know this, it's easier to travel everywhere nowadays. You know, I know that we're going through a tough time now with this pandemic, but if we put that aside, so in the last few years, it's been easier than ever before to travel, to make contact with people from different language backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, and technology facilitates that in many ways. So there is this idea of outsourcing. So many countries and many obviously communities and groups, they tend to look for sources that come from other different settings, you know, and then how they can benefit from those. and regardless the field or regardless their professional interest. So there is also this sort of reciprocal relationship. No, if we think about globalization, so we think that the idea that globalization or whatever happens outside our community has an effect on our own community, on our own life, and then it works the other way around too. So whatever we do in our local setting has also an effect on a larger community, maybe on the nation or on the world. And this is kind of where I come from to address this topic. So and then having said that, my goal with this presentation is to share with you some ideas, some possibilities that I have encountered in the literature, and maybe I have begun to explore some of them in my own teaching with my own students here at the university, at my university in Neiva. And then it's more of an invitation for those of you to think of the possibilities, to think of the ways that you can, the actions that you can take to promote or to begin to raise awareness among your students, and if there are teacher educators here, so for those for those prospective teachers that you work with in the teacher education program, so those future English teachers. So much of what I am going to say, I think, applies to teachers, to especially prospective teachers, beginning teachers, but also to some extent in-service teachers. If you think of your own professional development, and if you think of opportunities to explore or to learn more about this topic. Okay, I thought of giving you this quiz, and I understand that I may not be able to get comments or feedback at this time, but if you can try some of these questions on your own, maybe think of a possible response, a possible number, a possible percentage that you think would obviously complete each one of these statements. So that would be great. It's simply for you to take into consideration the situation of English in the world and how aware we are of the status of English and of the situation of English in the world. So it's again just for you to think about. And if you want, you can come up with your best estimate for each one of these items. Give you a couple of seconds if you just want to go through them and maybe think of a number, and maybe put the number down on paper, and then I'll share the answers in the next slide so that you can compare, what you thought or what you had in mind with what I have found. Okay, so let's move on now. Okay, and these are the answers. These are the answers to those statements. So the English language is the official or semi-official language of at least 60 countries. An estimated 1.2 and 1.4, depends on the source, million or billion people are believed to speak English as a second or foreign language. It's very important for you to have this in the back of your mind, as we address, or as I address, other constructs throughout my presentation. More than 2/3 of the world's scientists read and write in English. More than 50% of the world's print newspapers are published in English. 80% of the world's electronically stored information is in English. English language users comprise 35.2% of all internet users worldwide. 53% of international university students are taught in English, and in 2010 about how many people in the world are learning English at schools, colleges, and as independent adults, 2 billion people. I got this activity. I have to give the credit to Paul Tanner at Aichi Bunkyo University in Japan. And these are also the sources. These are the sources that contributed to the previous information that I shared with you again on the status of English. So you can try this on your own. I am sure that this is not the most updated information. Those numbers I am sure that have changed because as you can see, the sources are not obviously updated. But I am sure that you can do this on your own. So my intention or my goal was simply to begin to raise awareness on, again, on the situation of English in the world. But I am sure that you can do something similar with your students, maybe in your own classes. Try something, try maybe different sources, try different websites and see what you can find or see what your students can find in regards to the situation or the status of English. And this is just a small picture, of what I intended to show you. But you're welcome to consult and to look into other sources. And it will be an interesting exercise, with you, an interesting activity for you to do with your own students so that they can become, again, initially aware of the, again, situation of English or status of English in the world. Okay. Now, for those of you who have been abroad, so English is likely to be somewhat different from the way you speak or from the way you speak it. So, and you may have realized this already, no? So you may have realized that people use strange words or that they pronounce words or sentences or differently. Or sometimes people build their own sentences in ways that seem strange or odd to you in the beginning. So this is something that you may have observed, even if you haven't been abroad. So you may have obviously been in contact with people who speak English and these people come from different countries, so from different lingua cultural backgrounds, and therefore they are likely to use English in various ways, and they are likely to pronounce words differently. Maybe this is different from the way you were taught at the university, so you may have realized that already. The words maybe are used in a unique or in a different way as well, or maybe the sentences are put together or are combined in kind of a different strange words, strange ways, and then all these. This is something that we have observed at some point, and this also takes us to realize or to consider that English is being used in different ways across different countries, and by different people in different settings in different corners of the world. And you may have obviously realized this through media, through the television, through the internet, or through YouTube videos, for example. So this is a very important realization, and this is something that you may have perceived already, that you have experienced at some point already, and this is part of what we need to be aware of, initially aware of, that English is not used in exactly the same way by everybody in around the world. Now, who speaks English today? So English, as you can see, has been spread all over the world. It's no longer the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, but obviously we have the fact that English is also being used by other countries that are part of that in a way were initially connected to those dominant English varieties, the UK and the US primarily. but in a way they have also developed their own Englishes, their own variety of English as a result of obviously using English for some specific purposes in their own countries, in their own communities. So there are different models that illustrate obviously this idea of English in the world today. This is one of those, by Strevens. There is another one here by MacArthur, and this one illustrates all those different Englishes or different varieties of English. So you can see that this figure illustrates the different, how English has been classified. And this is just one example. I don't want you to take this as the only classification or as the only way of seeing, again, English in the world today, the presence of English in the world today. But it is clear that English has evolved, that English has changed, it has shifted, and it has clearly spread. And as a result, and those shifts that we continue to see in English have been the result of English making contact with other languages, with obviously local languages, with regional languages, with national languages. And it is also the result of people making English their own. So they have taken ownership of English. And therefore we see these many different varieties. And some of these varieties, they have their own resources, and they have their own linguistic resources. And in many cases, you can find, for example, dictionaries in these particular varieties of English. And there have been studies, obviously, that have contributed to the consolidation of these growing varieties of English. So this is another one. It's one of the most common classifications or models of world Englishes. This was proposed by Kashru in 1992. Kashru, an Indian scholar who proposed this, who suggested this model to understand the situation of English, or the status of English in the world. So he talks about inner circle, and that is obviously the small, you can see the three concentric circles. If you look at the figure on the left-hand side, so the blue circle, so that illustrates the inner circle, and we can find countries like the UK, the US, Australia, Canada. So, and these have been the traditional dominant varieties of English. So we tend to think of native speakers of English as to belong to these inner circle countries. And then we have the outer circle. The outer circle, and that corresponds to those, to countries like India, Jamaica, the Philippines, possibly Nigeria. So these are countries where English is also used for certain purposes. In many of these countries, English is used for businesses, or the students students are educated in English. So they take obviously all their classes in school in English. And therefore English has become a nativized, or English constitutes a nativized variety. So it has gone through a process of nativization. So they have developed their own English, to put it differently. And then we have the expanding circle English, or the expanding circle countries. And this is clearly the largest one. And we have, here we can find countries like Italy, Brazil, Russia, China, Colombia, Argentina. Well, obviously the great majority of countries where English has been traditionally considered a foreign language. So it is just maybe limited to regular English classes, and maybe to some extent students are exposed to English through media, but it's not, English does not have an official status, or maybe not even a semi-official status. So, and so the presence of English is not obviously as significant in the expanding circle as in the, compared to the inner circle, here and the outer circle here. So this is, again, as I was telling you, one of the most common, one of the most predominant models in the of world Englishes. We have this other one by Modiano, and this one is based on the level of proficiency. So this one highlights the relevance of proficiency, not necessarily a native status. So it's not based on native speaker English, for example, but it's based on the level of proficiency. Some people like to think of an expert user as opposed to a native speaker. So this one, this particular model reinforces this idea of English users as proficient and or as expert users, regardless or whether or not they are native or non-native speakers of English. So this is an interesting way of looking at that. And I know that the complex of the term native speaker is very complex. It's very difficult to define. And as it is also difficult to define the term proficiency. If we obviously think outside the administration of those common standardized examinations like TOEFL and IELTS. So if we think beyond those, so we will find that proficiency is very difficult to define, to determine, and also the level of competence and proficiency of native speakers of English. What is English as an international lingua franca? So again, I've been giving you a little bit of the background before we get to the central ideas. What is English as an international lingua franca? And again, it is English as it is used as a contact language among speakers from different first languages. And this is a definition given by Jenny Jenkins. And there is another similar one by Barbara Seidelhofer. Any use of English among speakers of different first languages for whom English is the communicative medium of choice and often the only option. So think of English as an international language or English as a lingua franca as a contact language. Is the language that obviously people are likely to use when they do not share, when they come from different lingua cultural backgrounds, that is when they do not share or when they do not have a common L1. So it's almost by default that they turn to English. So you can think of a typical scenario. So you can think of any one of us obviously interacting with somebody from Japan, or any one of us, you know, as Colombians interacting with somebody from Italy, or somebody from Nigeria, someone from Thailand, someone from Vietnam. So every time we encounter someone in an international context, every time we encounter or we run into someone who does not share our L1, so that is someone who does not speak Spanish in our case, so we will feel more inclined to turn to or to use English with this person. So this is, again, it's part of the, I think it's part of the genesis of this phenomenon of English as an international lingua franca. So English is there for anyone to use it, anyone who needs it, obviously, to use it. And therefore, it takes a special relevance, not only when we travel abroad, but also we have to bear in mind that English as an international language applies to international contexts and situations, but also to intranational. So even if you travel to, for instance, the United States, you may find many other varieties of English in the United States, because you're very likely to find and to interact with people who are not native speakers of English. I remember the first time, and I always share this with my students. So the first time that I went to the US and I took a cab from the airport, and then the taxi driver was someone from Thailand. So, and clearly I could tell that, obviously, by his accent, and I could I could obviously confirm that as I obviously began a conversation with him. And then this idea that we have in our country, and I think it's an idea that has been reinforced through the teaching of English, is that we are learning English to interact with native speakers of English. That idea is being seriously challenged. So because we are no longer, and our students are no longer learning English to interact with native speakers of English, or simply because they are going to travel to the US and that they think that they will be using English only with native speakers of American English or native speakers of English in the US. And then they will realize that that is no longer the case. So English has spread, and as English has spread all over the world, it has also shifted in many ways, in unpredictable ways. And this has been the result of people, of speakers of English, of non-native speakers of English, taking ownership of the language. This chart language teaching, or a globalized English language teaching. So you might want to think of, again, English as a lingua franca, or English as an international language as well. So here you can see the contrast. And you can see the traditional English as a foreign language paradigm, and then the growing English as an international language, or English as a global language model. So you can see sort of like contrast. And it's interesting to see, for example, that the target interlocutor was the native speaker of English. As I was just telling you, we thought that we initially, and this is part of our tradition, that we thought we wanted to, or that we needed to learn English only to interact with native speakers of English, as opposed to, no, we're now expected to interact with all English users coming from different corners of the world. The idea of owners or ownership. So yes, we have traditionally been taught, or we have been, we've been trying to, we've come to the conclusion almost that native speakers of English, they own the language, and they are the guardians of the language, and they are the ones who dictate what is right and what is wrong, and what is possible and what is not possible in English. As opposed to now, it's not just the native speakers, but all English users. The target culture, it was fixed. It was just, again, native speaker or native English culture, as opposed to fluid cultures. Now we welcome more cultures, and with the phenomenon of intercultural competence, this has taken special relevance. So, and if you go back to any of those course books, you know, from the 70s and 80s, maybe from the 90s, we still find many of those course books today that are obviously loaded with items, with cultural items of the dominant, with items of the dominant cultures, you know, primarily from obviously the British culture and the American culture. And it's not that difficult to find many of those course books. And now we are welcome to consider different cultures of English users, not just native English or native English speaking cultures. Teachers, we got both, yes, non-native English speaking teachers and native English speaking teachers, but the non-native English speaking teachers, they share the same language. And now we have non-native English speaking teachers who may not share the same language. So there may be somebody from Czech Republic, you know, teaching English to a group of students in South Africa, for example. So that is, so clearly maybe or in Argentina or in Brazil. So this non-native speaking teacher does not share the same L1 with his students, his or her students. So the norms, standard English versus diverse, flexible, multiple forms. And now there are people who often talk about not standard English, but standard Englishes. So there is more than one. The role model, we used to think of native speakers as the role models. And now we are more, or we should be more inclined to think of expert users as role models. So that is, you don't have to become, or you don't have to be, this is kind of the underlying idea. We don't have to be native speakers, you know, to become excellent users of the language. And we know, and you guys know, that there are many other people out there who are expert users of English without necessarily being native speakers of English. Source of materials, native speakers, native English and native English speakers. And now we have salient English speaking communities and contexts. So we can see that these communities of users, of English users, again, that are often made up of non-native English speakers, they also constitute sources, valid sources of materials. And then the first language and culture, remember, you probably remember this as well. So from the traditional perspective, our first language, Spanish, was meant to be perceived as an hindrance or as a source of interference. So it was an obstacle, and we were not supposed to welcome our first language into the English classroom. So, and remember how emphatic some of us were, or some of our teachers were in that regard. No, is that English is not allowed in this classroom. So that is also changing, because now we are more inclined to think of Spanish, or in our case, our first language, as a resource, or the student's first language. So regardless, it could be an indigenous language, it could be Spanish, you know, in our case. But again, the invitation now is to think of Spanish, or to think of the first language, of our first language, or of our students' first language, as a resource. I'll show you a couple of examples later. This cartoon simply illustrates, you know, the myth that many of us have of the native speakers as the authority, as the guardians of the language, but it also illustrates how native speakers misuse English, you know, in various ways. And it's interesting to see how their attitude shows otherwise in many cases. So it shows that they are more inclined to reject people, thinking that they do not know English, or that they do not speak English well. And this is kind of ironic, but again, they also reveal a lot of inconsistencies in terms of how they use English as well. And we can find many mistakes, again, and I am going to put mistakes in quotations, also by native speakers. So when native speakers when they use English, they also do not follow, again, the rules that are obviously established in the language. And therefore, they may not all of them constitute positive or good models of English, or good users of English. Okay. There is also, we can also find some ideas in Magboob in terms of English as an industry, and we can see how we have been seeing many of these ideas in our context, in our local context, in our national context. So Magboob illustrates this idea, or he presents this idea of English as an industry. And obviously, this goes in the direction of English being of many countries and many groups, I guess, taking advantage of English and selling all kinds of products and all kinds of items, no? So not only materials or just to think of some examples, so we can think of materials and resources or course books, language tests, and you know how expensive they are. But then many of these institutions or agencies, or again, agencies from traditional and dominant English-speaking countries. So they are constantly selling all kinds of products, all kinds of items. And that includes also teacher training and development programs, journals, publications, databases in English, all these being reinforced by media. So commercial industries, films, movies, television shows, fast food chains, big malls. It's a new colonialism. This is what Mahbub claims, a colonialism of the mind. And it's interesting to see, and I don't know what the situation is like in Popayan and in Cauca, but we can see here in Neiva is clearly not one of the largest cities of Colombia, but we have been able to see in the last few years how many businesses in the city have been adopting English names, for example. And that is, I think, is a result of this phenomenon of globalization, and as it's also a result of people making contact with English or with individuals who speak English, or having experiences related to English abroad, and then they obviously bring them to the city. And we can see if you go around Neiva, you're very likely to find what I call linguistic landscapes. So that is names or in the presence of English being felt in many spaces, public spaces, you know, especially when it comes to the names of businesses, as I was telling you. Particular uses of English, no particular dialect or language for that matter is linguistically better or worse than any other. Languages can carry meanings, and these meanings are attached to the ways people think and to the ways people use English. And these meanings are also attached to their own particular traditions and their ways of doing things and thinking and acting. So there is a lot of idiosyncrasy as well. So we tend to say things in a particular way because obviously it goes to, I think it's connected to how we process things, but it's also connected to our own traditions and our own culture. And this is how we say it. And this is how we make meaning of it. And we have these two examples, but there may be many more. I'll show you some others. In Pakistani English, so the expression is public dealing office, as opposed to an office which deals with the public. So you can see how people make use of English in their own ways. And it goes back to what I was telling you only a few minutes ago in terms of people taking ownership of English. So they're making English their own. We see another example. I am seeing the sky from here. While in British English, people are more likely to say, I can see the sky from here. Or in African American English. So when you've seen this on TV, you've heard this maybe through media. I ain't gonna do nothing. So, and if you see, so many of these expressions do not conform to one of the standard varieties of English, again, American or British English. So these ways of using English do not certainly conform to those two dominant varieties of English or to those inner circle varieties of English. but this is how people make use of English. This is how people make English their own. In Colombia, we often, this is one of my favorite examples. So in Colombia, we sometimes when we speak English, we use the present progressive instead of the simple present. So, or in a situation where native speakers of English are more inclined to use the simple present, we would be more inclined to use the present continuous. As when I say, my brother is working for that company, as opposed to my brother works for that company. But when this is what we often, this is also how we say it in Spanish, ¿no? When we say, mi hermano está trabajando para esa compañía, but I do not really mean that he's doing that at the moment. What I mean is that he does that regularly, right? So that's part of his job. So that is his job, and that is what he does, you know? But it's interesting to see how we use English in that particular way. We have this phenomenon is even more visible in countries like China, Japan. So where we can use, where we can find concrete examples of how they use English. And when you look at these, when you see these signs, for example, so you think of, maybe you think of a possible equivalent, or maybe you would say, I wouldn't say like that, or it's interesting how they say it. It's interesting how they put it, no? So the first one, if you look at this one, so note that the level of gap, and maybe if you see this, if you go to, I think this may be from South Korea or China, but if you see this, so you are very likely to think of the typical expression of mind the gap that is common in British English. But then at the same time, you realize that this is how they have been able to transform English. This is what they have done to it. Or the idea of happy trip for you, for example, or please be careful to traffic. So these expressions in a way correspond to how people use English in that particular community, in that particular region, or in that particular country. So, and it illustrates, you know, part of that variety of English. We can see this other one. This is taken from, it's one of those public signs in Mexico, I believe, you know, changuis. And you can see the picture of the sandwich, and then you can see at the same time what the intended meaning. And this is what I want to highlight. It's the intended meaning. So people are making meaning in their own ways. And obviously to mean what they have in mind, or to deliver or to convey a particular meaning. And then many of these instances clearly deviate from standard English or standard British English or standard American English. So it is certainly evident. But at the same time, you should realize that many of these ideas are intelligible. So this is something we would understand, no? Maybe even if you see the word changuis, you know, maybe isolated, maybe it's going to be kind of challenging maybe for some of us to figure out what they mean. But in this case, this is obviously accompanied by an illustration, an image. And this obviously, this image reinforces the intended meaning of the word. And it goes to, and the same thing applies to the other expressions, you know, like happy trip for you. So you may be thinking, I wouldn't put it like that. Maybe, okay, this is something that I would say, safe travels or have a safe trip. But this is a unique way of using English, and this is what I want to highlight. We have these other expressions. kiss and write is also from the Japanese context, I believe. You know? And this is a sign that I found it in one of those, not a textbook, but in one of those ELT books as an example of a particular use of English as an international language. And I think that this is something that you are likely to find at a train station. So kiss and write. So you can figure out the meaning, I guess. You may struggle initially. Why would they say something like kiss and write? Okay. So maybe it has to do with the fact that when you are at a train station to see someone off, so you just kiss this person goodbye, and this person is going to take a ride on the train. So it's something that we will have to work out, obviously, but we don't remember. We look at language in context. So you see, obviously, the context of how the expression or where the expression is being used, you know, and therefore we are, again, almost invited to figure out, you know, what they mean. And then these are some other expressions. I'm sure that these are probably familiar to you. I don't speak English, but I defend myself, or collaborating with the exit. And you can find many more. I know that these expressions, you know, make us laugh, and they maybe represent how, and maybe these represent a kind of a humorous use of English in our context, because these expressions have been taken literally from Spanish, maybe. And I don't know if at some point we're going to get to consider this, or to talk or to refer to this and to many other expressions as Colombian English. Maybe at some point, but to be able to get there, we need to have obviously a rigorous study, and that is a study at the level of corpus linguistics. So that is to study tones of extracts of we need to gather evidence to see how people use English in Colombia in many different ways and through many different resources and media resources to be able to get there. So I don't feel confident about talking to you about Colombian English at this time, because it has not been consolidated, and therefore we need to do studies in that regard. And I would say, I suggest again, studies from the perspective of corpus linguistics. These are some other uses. How am I doing with time? Okay. So these are some other uses. I'll go through this very quickly so you can see, you can certainly relate to some of this, you know. The non-use of the third person present tense, we sometimes drop that, and this is how people use English in many different contexts around the world. Interchangeable use of the relative pronouns, as in a book who or a person which. The omission of the definite and indefinite articles, and when I say, we say the man instead of men, for example, depending on the context. When we really mean men, we say, or some people say the men, and therefore, so we may find this, it may be perceived as wrong, obviously, by native speakers of English. The use of tag questions, or the tag question, isn't it? Or when we tend to say, I don't know if you have noticed that we tend to say, instead of using a tag question, and you know how tag questions or question tags work, you know the routine. I am not going to go into that, but we often say, or we often turn to the expression right, as when you did the homework, right? As opposed to you did the homework, didn't you? So it's not always used in that way. So some other nouns that are often considered uncountable, so like information, always. So what are the odds? So is it, yeah, there may be some people out there in other parts of the world who can easily say informations or advices, and we know that this is incorrect from the perspective of standard English, but again, it may be possible it is within the possibilities, again, from the perspective of English as an international language. And then there is another one. I think that this is I didn't refer to this one earlier, but this is also one that we often use in Colombia. And I've seen, and you've seen maybe your students using this, or saying things like, I want that we discussed about my, as opposed to, I want us to discuss. And it's very common for students, for our students to say things like, I want that you help me. And again, so it is intelligible because we understand what the student means, even though it does not necessarily correspond to, again, standard, a standard American English or a standard British English. So these are just some examples again. So all of what I've said before leads us to think about these questions, or to formulate these questions. And I'm not going to go through all these questions, but clearly you can see what those questions are intended for. And it's also clear that these questions constitute an invitation for us to think about our actions. So if there is something we are expected to do in that regard, how are we supposed to proceed now if, given all those previous considerations, the question now is, how are we supposed to proceed? Or as one of the participants in a study by Lourdes Mokanu claims, what do you want us to do? So the question was, or the question for this teacher at that time in that study was, what do you want us to do? And I'm not bringing with me today responses to all of these questions. So these are questions for our own reflection, and maybe to begin to think of possible actions, to take in this regard. So I am going to leave them there for you, and it's for you to keep this in the back of your minds as to think of actions and possibly think of alternatives in terms of what to do. Is this something that is there anything that I should do as a language teacher in Popayan, in Neiva, in Colombia? How am I supposed to proceed now? English has changed. I know that. Okay, English has been, and it continues to be transformed in various ways. Okay. So what are some of the major considerations that we are supposed to have, or that we are expected to keep in mind for the development of an EIL pedagogy? So there are, according to Sandra Mackey, there are three major understandings that we need to consider and that underlie EIL pedagogy. So the first one of them is that the various purposes for which English is used in multilingual communities. People use English for a very wide variety of purposes, and they do that in multilingual communities, because we know that it's very easy to find people who speak other languages in our context, maybe, and if we travel abroad, it's even more evident. Or even if we don't travel abroad, they will come to us. They'll come to us for various reasons. The second is the impracticality and I would highlight this, non-necessity of striving for native-like competence by many bilingual users of English. So we need to get rid of, once and for all, we need to help our students get rid of this idea of the need, of the non-necessity of striving for, of pursuing a native-like competence, as opposed to, again, a proficient user of the language. The goal should not necessarily be to imitate native speakers, but again, to become proficient and expert users of the language. And I'll give you a few other ideas in that regard later. And then the third one, a view of language variation as a natural phenomenon in language, in language teaching and in language education. So language spreads, and as language spreads, it shifts, it changes. And as it, and as it is in the hands, as language is now in the hands of many people around the world, people whose first language is clearly different from English. And therefore, these people are all likely to transform English in various ways. So it's been, language changes, it evolves in many ways. And this is the result again of international mobility, for example, when people travel to English-speaking countries, so they learn the language and they come back to their home countries and they bring the language with them. And then therefore, English begins to be transformed as more and more people take ownership of it. So, and I want to highlight here a model, and I got this from Lourdes Mocano, an interesting article. I included that in the references if you want to consult the article later. These two authors, they suggest what they called an awareness-raising model for non-native English speakers. It consists of five stages, stage 1 through 5. So the first one involves, and I think it's aimed to English teachers, not so much to students, but there are many things we can take and we can bring to our classes to begin to raise students' awareness of this phenomenon as well. There is a lot we should do, and there is a lot we can do in terms of helping the students again deconstruct those previous and dominant ideas in terms of English as a foreign language, and in terms of the expectation to learn English to communicate only with, or almost exclusively with, native speakers of English. And therefore, some of these ideas of this model, again presented by Lourdes and Mocano, may apply to our students, but it is essentially aimed to teachers. So the first stage involves, as I was telling you, some exposing teachers, in this case, or students, to realistic situations with examples of cultural and linguistic diversity. These two links, so the first one is, it shows, this video shows the, I'll share the link with all of you, but this video shows how many different people use English and also use their own L1s, you know, in a multilingual setting, in a multilingual context such as New York City. I am not going to play the video because we're not going to have enough time to do that, but I'll share the link with you. And then this is another one also. It's another video where you can see how people also interact in English, and you see how one of them does not speak English, or he's not very fluent in English, but he relies on the resources provided by his L1. So, and it's interesting to see how he manages to communicate and to sound intelligible to somebody else. There is a girl he likes, there is a girl that he's interested in, and obviously he's motivated to do his best and to try to convey meaning and to obviously tell her what he wants in his own ways, obviously, and relying on L1 as on his L1, that is Spanish in his case, as a resource. The second stage involves analysis of data showing non-native speakers' professional performance. So this one involves showing teachers or students, in this case, evidence of how non-native speakers of English use English in a successful way. And they are not obviously native speakers of English, and they constitute instant models of English. So this one takes you to an interview with Pep Guardiola, and it's obviously an interview in English. And as you all know, Pep Guardiola is, or as maybe all of you know, his L1 is not English. He's from Spain, but he speaks English, obviously. But he does that successfully, despite the fact that his English is not his native language, and you can see traces of his accent, of his Spanish accent. And that is, again, the purpose of this second stage, is to show, to give evidence again of a professional performance by non-native speakers. Then the stage number three involves analysis of examples of academic uses of English. So how of English as a lingua franca. So that is, people use English for various purposes. But it's in academic context, in academic settings. And then stage four, prospective scenarios for international English. I am aware that I am running out of time. I'll wrap it up in just a few more minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. Prospective scenarios for international English. So we offer teachers and students, maybe teachers can do this with the students. They highlight the possible scenarios where they are likely to use English. And it's all about awareness and choice. I am not suggesting that we should now leave behind the idea of learning native speaker English, or what to do with those students who insist on the idea that they want to sound like native speakers and they want to do their best to imitate native speakers. And obviously it's their choice if they decide to do so. So it's, again, but the point is to make them aware. It's important for them to be aware of the existence, and they should recognize the existence of these other different varieties of English. And if they obviously want to pursue a particular variety of English, let's say American English, it obviously is their right to do so, and it's their choice to do so. And then stage number 5 involves reflection on their own teaching identity, context, So what is it what they really want to do? So what's their realistic expectation? Okay. So what is their realistic versus the ideal goal? So this one, stage 5, involves a lot of reflections. We don't have enough time to cover some of the other slides. I'll just finish up with these thoughts. The use of one of the native speaker models as a convenient starting point, and this is one way of doing it. Some teachers decide to pursue this or to go with this idea, the starting point, and they go from there to raise learners' awareness of variation in English, and to reinforce or to boost their skills in negotiating their meaning as they develop their own variety of English. Okay, so that is one way. That's one alternative, one possibility. So maybe the starting point is with one of those dominant varieties as a reference point. The key is to a realistic approach in many contexts. Could be the key to a realistic approach in many contexts could be reimagining, and I want to emphasize this: reimagining a competent, proficient user of English as someone who can communicate effectively, as opposed to someone who can again imitate or approximate the idealized standard native speaker model. And we need to move away. Dutcher highlights and maintains that we need to move away from a tendency to measure language proficiency in relation to British and American standards towards a dynamic approach to language proficiency. It's this approach that recognizes variation in English across different users and different uses of English. And therefore, this also leads Kashrou, or we can connect this to Kashrou's idea of an attitudinal readjustment. We need to readjust, our attitudes towards English and towards the implications of English. Okay, it's 8:53. I think we may have, I'll include the references and a couple of other slides that I didn't have the chance to go through. But I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, any comments.
Professor, yes, we got actually two questions, but I would like to refer to just one because of, time. It says, Professor Vallejo, thanks, Professor Macias, for sharing your knowledge. Could you please tell us if you know how to teach this English as a lingua franca with children? I find it more challenging with this population. So the question is how to teach this English.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I
how to
couldn't
teach
hear?
this English as a lingua franca with
I
children.
couldn't hear the question.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think it's yes. I heard your question. Yes, I got it. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think it's in many and this has been reported by different authors. So the fact that it is probably we need to establish some foundations initially, before proceeding with this idea of English as a lingua franca or English as an international language. And it may be it would be helpful to make sure that students have some foundations, in terms of the language, so that they can, maybe if they are at a lower intermediate level, so they can begin to cope with the challenges of dealing with other varieties of English. And the expectation has not, and I don't think it is, to simply adopt or to learn all those many different varieties of English. But the point is to make students aware of the existence of these other varieties, so that they do not grow disrespectful about these other different varieties whenever they encounter them, when they travel abroad or when they interact with people from different societies, from different communities, from different cultures. Now, I understand that, and I think it would be a tremendous challenge to approach that initially with kids, or with children at a very early age. But we can progressively help them become aware and help them welcome that there are other ways of using English. And maybe if we expose them minimally to some other uses of English, to how people from maybe inviting people whose first language is not English, but who speak English confidently, regardless, again, a possible trace of accent. Maybe these can begin to help these kids, so these children, become more aware of and to recognize maybe the fact that there are other people out there who clearly are not native speakers of English, but who are able to express and to convey their ideas to them. I think by presenting them with different models and doing that progressively. But the expectation is never for them to become proficient, or for any one of us to become proficient in all of those varieties of English, but it's to recognize their existence and to be respectful towards those other different varieties.
Okay, Professor Macias, thank you very much. We really appreciate your, sharing.
Did you hear? Oh.
Yes, thank you very much. We really thank you for.
Did you hear my answer?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Thank you very much, Professor, for being with us and for sharing, such an important and relevant topic, to our context, and to raise, awareness of, the importance of, seeing English learning as something that we can get, that we can achieve, seeing English as a, something global, something that we really can achieve. But of course, we have a lot of challenges and we have our own conditions. But I think we have to, as you said, take ownership of learning and see English as something that we can, achieve as a global language. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for your participation.
Buenos días, señores participantes.
Hello?
Sí. Buenos días, señores participantes. En estos momentos damos inicio a la ponencia número 1, titulada Importancia de la implementación de herramientas TIC para el mejoramiento del inglés en el ámbito educativo, a cargo del especialista Cristian Hernán Bonilla Gutiérrez, quien es licenciado en Lenguas Modernas de nuestra Universidad del Cauca. Actualmente estudia una especialización en TIC para la innovación educativa. Lleva 9 años de docencia. Además, ha participado en actividades de inmersión en inglés para el MEN y es creador del recurso educativo abierto WeTech. En estos momentos se desempeña como docente de la Universidad del Cauca y del SENA. Y profesor Cristian Bonilla, bienvenido y tiene la palabra.
Bueno, muy buenos días para todos. Muchísimas gracias por esta magnífica presentación, señorita Marisela López. Bueno, primero que todo, pues muy agradecido con la oportunidad que dio la Universidad del Cauca y el programa de lenguas extranjeras me ha ofrecido pues para ser partícipe de este maravilloso seminario. Y pues realmente en estos momentos me encuentro muy sorprendido por la cantidad de compañeros, amigos y maestros que se encuentran conectados con nosotros en estos momentos. Bueno, quisiera compartirles que esta presentación que realizaré el día de hoy es para que podamos entender, comprender un poco más acerca de cómo implementar la tecnología en el ámbito educativo, desde el inglés o desde el francés, en pro de buscar una motivación, de que podamos poco a poco, desde una perspectiva muy positiva, que los estudiantes de lenguas extranjeras o especialmente de estudiantes que nosotros tengamos en nuestro ámbito, puedan tomarle ese amor que de pronto nosotros en este proceso hemos ido adquiriendo. Y especialmente si nos encontramos implementando las tecnologías de la información y de la comunicación, algo que de pronto, tal vez a través de lo que ha sido el proceso de la pandemia, ¿sí? Se han podido ver mayor reflejadas, pero podemos destacar que desde mucho antes se han venido realizando procesos de investigación, procesos de desarrollo y análisis con relación a las tecnologías de la información y las comunicaciones, especialmente implementadas en el aprendizaje del inglés o de una lengua extranjera. Bueno, y sin más preámbulos y antes de pasar a los contenidos, quiero darle gracias nuevamente a todos los compañeros que se encuentran en estos momentos conectados y especialmente a una persona que me ha acompañado en este proceso. Su nombre es Angélica Guevara, que ella ha sido parte de la inclusión de este proyecto, del desarrollo de este proyecto y que ha sido una colaboradora y facilitadora para el desarrollo de este proyecto llamado WeTech y especialmente la importancia que nosotros queremos desarrollar e implementar en el proceso de la implementación de las tecnologías de la información en el aprendizaje del inglés. En estos momentos voy a compartir mi pantalla. Entonces quisiera saber, ¿me confirman por favor si estamos viendo en estos momentos mi pantalla?
Sí, la estamos viendo.
Ok, correcto. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, entonces, como ya les decían, yo en estos momentos me encuentro elaborando en la Universidad del Cauca y también trabajo como instructor del SENA en el área de bilingüismo. Para la Universidad del Cauca estoy desarrollando algo que se llama el proyecto pedagógico de las licenciaturas. Y este trabajo que se está desarrollando también busca que se pueda implementar a través de diferentes herramientas TIC. Pero, ¿de dónde nace esta idea? ¿De dónde nace la importancia de implementar las TIC en el área de inglés, en el área del francés, en todas las áreas confines a las tecnologías de la información? Bueno, el año pasado me encontraba yo estaba hablando con un compañero del SENA, en el cual tratábamos de que todas las herramientas que nosotros teníamos en nuestro día a día se pudieran digitalizar. En el transcurso de esta charla, el profe me dice, bueno, estamos trabajando ejercicios de construcción desde el punto del inglés. Y él me dice, mira, profe, yo le muestro esas herramientas, qué genial sería que nosotros pudiéramos digitalizar esto. Y me dice él, profe, ¿cree usted que todas las actividades puedan llevarse de lo presencial a lo virtual? Usted está loco. Algo que para mí me causó mucha curiosidad, porque yo dije, bueno, ¿Por qué no? Desde este año, desde este 2019, inicios del 2019, me puse en la tarea de investigar e indagar todos aquellos procesos que podrían digitalizarse a través de las tecnologías de la información. Pero para ello yo quiero hacer un pequeño ejercicio en estos momentos. Para aquellas personas que se encuentran en el chat de Facebook y en el chat de YouTube, acabo de enviar un pequeño ejercicio relacionado a qué entendemos nosotros por las tecnologías de la información. Para aquellas personas que de pronto tengan la posibilidad de escanear este código QR, también nos invitará o nos enviará al link que les estoy compartiendo tanto por el chat de YouTube como por el chat de Facebook. Vamos a tomar un minuto, solamente son 3 palabritas que vamos a escribir aquí que nos relacionan a nosotros acerca de qué entendemos por las tecnologías de la información. ¿Qué son para ustedes las tecnologías de la información? ¿Listo? Entonces, quiero en estos momentos que, por favor, aquellas personas que se encuentran conectadas con nosotros pueda en estos momentos responder este pequeño ejercicio. Vamos a ver cómo nos va. Entonces, voy a compartir nuevamente mi pantalla, pero con los resultados del ejercicio. Entonces, esperaremos un minuto para las personas que, por favor, están en estos momentos, puedan responder en pantalla. Bueno, y ya vamos teniendo algunos resultados. Tenemos la respuesta de una persona que asocia las palabras de tecnología de información con progreso, la palabra poder, la palabra magia. Vamos a ver qué otros resultados nos puede arrojar este ejercicio. Entonces, daremos un minuto para dar respuesta, porque realmente me interesa en estos momentos conocer cuáles son esas inquietudes, cuáles son esas ideas que podemos plantear a través de las tecnologías de la información. Entonces, daremos un minutico, esperemos a ver si algunas personas más. Tenemos aproximadamente 55 personas conectadas. Ya hemos recibido más respuestas. Tenemos retos, conexiones, herramienta. Gracias. Vamos a ver quién más nos colabora respondiendo este ejercicio. Bueno, van saliendo más respuestas aún. Tenemos poder, accesibilidad, socialización, progreso. Ya han 2 personas que van respondiendo y la relacionan con progreso. Por acá me responden también en inglés. Speed, capacity, tools. Excelente. Innovación. Maravillosa palabra. Creo que en este ejercicio que nosotros estamos haciendo para este seminario vamos a tocar esa palabra innovación. Un factor fundamental en la implementación de las herramientas TIC. Bueno, entonces, de las 10 personas que han respondido hasta el momento, 7 personas, podemos identificar que hay una conexión entre lo que es las tecnologías de la información y la implementación con esas herramientas o con esas materias que nos permiten socializar en el contexto educativo. Bueno, ya continuando con la presentación, entonces, nuevamente compartiré mi pantalla. Bueno, entonces, para el ejercicio que vamos a hacer en estos momentos, voy a dividir esta presentación en las siguientes partes. Lo que es la introducción, ¿qué son las TIC? TIC en el ámbito educativo colombiano, un factor fundamental, algo que estamos viviendo en estos momentos, en esta realidad. El inglés y las TIC, ¿cómo vamos a hacer esa unión? La propuesta WITEC, ahorita en la presentación les quiero compartir lo que es este recurso educativo abierto, lo que he venido desarrollando desde el año pasado y este año, pero especialmente este año. ¿Listo? Las conclusiones y las preguntas. Bueno, sin más preámbulos, entonces quiero compartirles qué son las TIC. Bueno, no estamos refiriéndonos, a veces se nos viene a la cabeza que cuando hablamos de TIC, lo primero que hablamos es de estos dulcecitos. No, estamos hablando de las tecnologías de la información y la comunicación. ¿Listo? ¿Alguna vez ustedes se han preguntado cómo funcionaba el mundo antes de que existiera Internet? ¿Cómo funcionaba el mundo antes de que existieran los computadores, las tabletas, los celulares? Bueno, tratemos de retomar el tiempo o el año que empezó a funcionar todo lo que son las tecnologías o las metodologías de comunicación en el año 1989. Tengamos en cuenta lo siguiente, ¿sí? En ese entonces eran muy limitadas, ¿sí? Por ahí decía alguien que aquel que tenía un celular o tenía un computador era alguien de dinero. Hoy en día, muchas personas tenemos acceso, sea desde nuestros hogares, en una sala de internet, en la universidad o en las bibliotecas. Entonces, podemos identificar que el acceso es mucho mayor, es mucho más amplio. Pero ahora tratemos de pensar nuevamente en esos años, ¿sí? ¿Cómo era el proceso de envío de una carta? Entonces, teníamos que acercarnos primeramente a la oficina de correo, esta tenía que ser verificada, analizada y posteriormente tenía que ser sellada. Y adicional a ello, tendría un tiempo muy amplio para que nosotros pudiéramos entregar esta carta, ¿sí? Bueno, pero eso no es todo. Tratemos de pensar cómo se hizo la escritura, por ejemplo, de libros o cómo se empezó a hacer el compartir de la información en estos tiempos, ¿sí? Antes de Internet no existían los PDFs, antes de Internet no existían documentos Word. Por lo tanto, compartir estos libros era mucho más complejo. El acceso a la información era más difícil. ¿Listo? Hoy podemos nosotros realizar el compartir de cualquier documento en segundos a través de correo electrónico. Podemos hacerlo por Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, entre otros. Y si son documentos académicos, también llevarán su proceso. Tengamos en cuenta algo, que la implementación del Internet en muchos ambientes ha mejorado la capacidad del aprendizaje en los estudiantes, ¿sí? A lo largo de los años, tratemos de imaginar cómo fue la educación en ese entonces. En estos momentos nosotros nos encontramos en la cuarta revolución industrial llamada la era digital, ¿sí? Tratemos de retomar aproximadamente 200 años, la revolución industrial. El aprendizaje eran estudiantes, más de 60, 80 o tal vez 100 estudiantes en un aula con 1, 2 máximo maestros y el régimen que se manejaba era muy amplio. Las infraestructuras eran muy reducidas, ¿sí? Y el aprendizaje era muy recto, ¿sí? Tratemos de ahora analizar la situación que estamos viviendo ahora, ¿sí? En esta implementación las herramientas se vuelven una necesidad, se vuelven una obligación. ¿Y por qué digo que se vuelven una obligación? Porque en estos momentos tenemos que empezar a analizar, ¿sí? ¿Por qué están incurriendo todas las necesidades, tanto en el ámbito educativo como en las empresas, a innovar utilizando estas herramientas, ¿sí? Partiendo de este punto, se podría decir que la implementación de las TIC en estos momentos ha revolucionado la capacidad de tanto estudiantes como docentes a recurrir a metodologías innovadoras que permitan el desarrollo continuo del aprendizaje para la era digital en la cual nosotros nos estamos encontrando. Pero bueno, ¿cómo estamos implementando ahora esto en Colombia? ¿Listo? Hoy en Colombia aproximadamente, hoy en el mundo aproximadamente 3.000 millones de personas cuentan con acceso a Internet. Pero de acuerdo a un estudio hecho por el Ministerio de las Tecnologías de la Información en Colombia, plantea que Colombia es uno de los países con el menor acceso a Internet, ¿sí? Tenemos únicamente, escuchemos la cifra, 4.686.000 personas con una conectividad fija y 4.827.000 personas, ¿sí? Con una conectividad móvil. Nosotros decimos, bueno, pero aproximadamente 4 millones es una cifra amplia. Pues les puedo decir que no, si hablamos que a nivel mundial aproximadamente son 3.000 millones de personas. Con la inclusión del Internet en nuestro país, se vienen a incluir todo lo que son las tecnologías de la información y las TIC. Básicamente las tecnologías de la información y las TIC son aquellas herramientas, aquellos instrumentos que nos permiten guardar información. A pesar de que existen muchas herramientas, tanto físicas como virtuales, pasa o tenemos una dificultad que el docente tiene miedo a la implementación de estas herramientas en su aula. ¿Por qué? Porque sucede que tenemos una dificultad relacionada a la alfabetización digital. Los docentes hoy en día no están recibiendo la suficiente capacitación para el manejo de herramientas virtuales e inclusive, ¿sí? Herramientas software, como puede ser un computador, como puede ser una tablet, ¿sí? Muchos docentes de un carácter tradicionalista se siente afectado por el manejo de las herramientas que estamos tratando de implementar hoy en día. ¿Por qué? Este miedo se da a que tal vez puedan ser desplazados en algún momento, puedan ser reemplazados en algún momento por un computador, por un robot o por una aplicación. ¿Que lo estamos viendo? Claro que lo estamos viendo. Pero hay una gran diferencia, que las tecnologías de la información no se implementan solas. Tienen que ser desarrolladas por una persona que tenga la capacidad de trabajar en estos aspectos, ¿sí? Bueno, estamos hablando de las competencias docentes en esta área digital, ¿sí? Tenemos que tener en cuenta algo. Hoy en día hay una relación muy fuerte tradicionalista que es estudiante-profesor, ¿sí? Es esa relación unidireccional que ha permitido una dificultad en la evolución de la competencia docente y en la evolución en la competencia digital del estudiante. ¿Por qué? Pues ya lo dijimos antes, es muy complejo hablar de que el docente está con esa mentalidad de que pueda ser reemplazado. Por lo tanto, es importante que nosotros en el contexto que estamos trabajando sea prudente empezar a implementar estas herramientas, ¿sí? Muchos docentes y muchos estudiantes tienen la facilidad de manejar lo que puede ser Twitter, puede ser Facebook o puede ser YouTube, pero en el momento que tuvimos un choque en estos momentos, lo que estamos viviendo a través de la pandemia, nos dimos cuenta que utilizamos estas herramientas, pero cuando empezamos a utilizar otras herramientas en el ámbito académico, se ha vuelto mucho más compleja, ¿sí? A lo que nosotros tenemos que empezar a capacitarnos para poder darle un giro. Esta interacción debe ser mayor, debe ser más alta, debe buscarse la manera de que nosotros, como estudiantes y como docentes, podamos implementar estas tecnologías de la información. Cabe resaltar que otro de las características que tienen las tecnologías de la información y las comunicaciones nos permiten enfocarnos en las necesidades de nuestro alumno, ¿sí? Mirar esos intereses, mirar la habilidad, entre otras características que pueden desarrollarse en el proceso de aprendizaje, ¿sí? En el proceso de aprendizaje, y no solamente en el de aprendizaje, sino que en el de enseñanza. Tenemos que tener en cuenta algo, ese orden sincrónico que pueda llevar las diferentes temáticas implementadas en nuestra aula puede ser un factor potencialmente grande para poder desarrollar cualquiera de las habilidades relacionadas al aprendizaje, ¿sí? Bueno, pero tenemos también que tener en cuenta que esto no se centra únicamente para las personas que de pronto están manejando un computador o una tablet. Hoy en día, las tecnologías de la información nos ha permitido incluir, envolvernos, evolucionar en todo lo que es un factor fundamental, hablando de la inclusión. Se están desarrollando software y se están desarrollando hardware relacionados para todo lo que es el trabajo con personas que tienen un proceso de dificultad de visión, un proceso de dificultad en su escucha, un proceso de la dificultad en el habla. Entonces, todos estos aspectos han permitido que la evolución de las tecnologías de la información crezcan cada día más. Otro de los usos que podemos encontrar en la implementación de las tecnologías es ese trabajo colaborativo y cooperativo. Si logramos darnos cuenta mundial que puede realizarse, no sé, por un computador, una tablet o un celular, ¿sí? Puede ser llegada a millones de personas. ¿Sí? Esta información puede ser compartida a miles de millones de personas a través de un blog, a través de un video. O bueno, hoy en día muchas personas podemos relacionarlos con herramientas tan que de pronto puedan ser de ocio, pero que pueden ser utilizadas para la mejora, como puede ser un TikTok. Pero entonces aquí se genera la siguiente pregunta. ¿Cómo podemos implementar estas tecnologías de la información y el inglés? Bueno, entonces vamos a resumirnos un poco a un estudio relacionado con lo que es Colombia versus Latinoamérica. Entonces, en un estudio realizado por EF English Proficiency Index, que es un programa para analizar diferentes datos relacionados a los niveles de inglés a nivel mundial y a nivel local, se implementó una prueba de aproximadamente 950,000 personas que tomaron este test, ¿sí? Y pues demostró ahorita, al año 2018, que Colombia, entre los países de Latinoamérica, ¿sí? Y entre un listado de 63 países, se encuentra en el puesto 42, algo que considero que es muy preocupante. Después se hizo un análisis con relación a 80 países y la respuesta es más negativa aún. Se encuentra en el puesto 63, incluyendo en Latinoamérica como los niveles más bajos, Colombia en un puesto relativamente muy bajo y pues que para el análisis que uno quiere desarrollar en este proceso, pues es necesario que empecemos a implementar pues diferentes herramientas para mejorar. No solamente enfocarnos en lo que puede hacer un audio, una escucha, ¿sí? Sino que empecemos a crear herramientas reales para el desarrollo de este proceso. Bueno. Tenemos ciertos aspectos fundamentales para lo que es el proceso de aprendizaje de las TIC. Tenemos que tener en cuenta algo. La implementación de la tecnología en nuestro ámbito colombiano, ¿sí? Es algo que ha venido creciendo potencialmente. Tratemos de recordar a aquellos compañeros que empezamos a estudiar de pronto en el 2010, 2011, ¿sí? El programa de lenguas modernas todavía seguía trabajando con videocaseteras, algo que ha ido evolucionando. En estos momentos, el programa posee Smart TVs, tiene computadores, tiene un acceso a Internet, tiene una conectividad amplia que puede permitir el desarrollo y el mejoramiento. Hoy en día, las herramientas que se encuentran en Internet, tanto pagas como gratuitas, permiten que haya ese mejoramiento. ¿Sí? Permiten que haya un cambio de lo que es la metodología tradicional a la tecnología real, a la tecnología necesaria. Pero bueno, este aprendizaje basado en competencias permite que haya un aprendizaje efectivo desde cualquier ámbito laboral, en cualquier materia. Podemos identificar que los factores, ¿sí?, que se ven afectados en este proceso va a realizar un cambio. Como dicen ahí, el plus en cualquier carrera, ¿sí? Por ahí dicen también, cualquier persona que está implementando, que tiene un nivel de inglés certificado, tiene su plus en su ejercicio, en su profesión. Por lo tanto, esto es lo que nos permite a nosotros crear un aprendizaje basado en competencias que permita a la persona desarrollar y volverse efectivo en el campo laboral. Tomemos el inglés como una necesidad del mundo. Tenemos que analizar que todos, absolutamente todos, los que de pronto quieren empezar a viajar o explorar, se incluyan en aprender el inglés o el francés u otra herramienta que permita este aprendizaje. Por lo tanto, es necesario que las herramientas para implementar las tecnologías y implementar el mejoramiento del inglés sea muy amplio. Desde esta perspectiva, ¿sí? Nos sirve en la implementación de las TIC una gran posibilidad de brindar oportunidades de potencialización desde la parte auditiva, escrita, lectora, oral en inglés. Es necesario destacar el rol fundamental que juega el docente en este proceso, ¿sí?, el cual consiste en la creación de actividades didácticas usando recursos TIC para fortalecer la enseñanza y el aprendizaje del inglés de manera significativa, dinámica e interactiva. Desde este proceso se genera una gran pregunta, que es la siguiente. ¿Estamos nosotros en la capacidad de desarrollar recursos educativos que permitan el mejoramiento del inglés? Desde ahí es donde nace la propuesta WITEC. ¿Qué es WITEC? WITEC es un recurso educativo abierto, ¿sí?, diseñado e implementado para la especialización en TIC de la innovación educativa que busca el mejoramiento del inglés. ¿Desde dónde parte? De que nosotros los estudiantes podamos desarrollar recursos educativos que permitan el aprendizaje de nuestros propios compañeros. No hay nada mejor que nosotros podamos demostrar que lo que sabemos lo podamos compartir con otra persona. Ya se han visto, algunos estudiantes desarrollan, digamos, tarjetas, desarrollan objetos, desarrollan juegos dentro del aula, pero ¿qué pasa? Se quedan en su carácter físico, se quedan en su carácter presencial. ¿De dónde se busca? De que todos estos recursos que nosotros tenemos de carácter presencial puedan ir a la parte física. Por lo tanto, decidí que en ese proceso se pudiera desarrollar un software el cual permitiera, ¿sí?, a través de Internet digitalizar estas herramientas. ¿Qué se ha logrado? Hasta el momento se ha logrado una página web en un dominio abierto, ¿sí?, desarrollado e implementado a través de la página Excel Learning, que permite que todas las personas que quieran, a través de una licencia Creative Commons, ¿sí?, puedan compartir este recurso, dando a las personas la posibilidad de modificar, editar y hacer todo lo que decían desde el ámbito educativo, obviamente con la capacidad de compartir, ¿sí?, el recurso a los demás y poder ayudar a largo plazo. Bueno, En estos momentos el recurso es un proyecto piloto, es un proyecto que todavía se está desarrollando, es un proyecto que está en curso a través de prácticas educativas abiertas. ¿En dónde se ha implementado? En estos momentos lo he implementado en dos sectores, lo que es el programa de licenciatura de la Universidad de Cauca de Música y el programa de Literatura y Lengua Castellana. Hasta el momento los resultados han sido positivos. Los estudiantes están buscando que todo lo que ellos hacen de carácter físico lo podamos volver de carácter virtual, ¿sí? Entonces, se hizo unos estudios previos, se ha hecho una investigación previa a lo que ha concluido que en estos momentos los estudiantes se encuentran en la capacidad como nativos digitales de evolucionar el mundo a través de la incursión de los recursos educativos en tecnologías abiertas. Bueno, conclusiones, chicos, y gente en general. Quiero decirles que el desarrollo y la implementación de las TIC ahorita van a jugar un papel muy grande. La digitalización y el proceso virtual va a incluirse más y más, ¿sí? Y la necesidad del mundo se va a volver obligatoria en este proceso digital, ¿sí? Mi invitación es a que todas las personas que tengan la posibilidad de trabajar, crear e implementar recursos educativos puedan hacerlo desde las prácticas educativas abiertas, para que muchos más docentes a nivel mundial puedan utilizar día a día lo que ustedes están haciendo en sus aulas, en sus clases. Bueno, sin más preámbulos, le agradezco mucho a todos por esta atención y quisiera saber si pues tenemos preguntas, dudas o inquietudes. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, profesor Bonilla, por esta ponencia tan interesante, ¿no? Es un tema de verdad de mucha actualidad y que nos concierne en realidad en nuestra labor docente. No sé si hay alguna pregunta, yo no veo aquí en el chat. Si hay preguntas. Creo que no. No, creo que no, profesor Bonilla. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos y que acaben de tener un maravilloso día.
Gracias a usted. Apreciados participantes, no se olviden, por favor, que el evento sigue por Zoom con egresados, ¿no? En este momento vamos a tener un receso y agradecemos a todos por su participación y su presencia. ¿Listo? Muchas gracias.